So you already have these tools where kids are using this in these ways that go beyond it's cheating. They're going beyond use for my homework. It gets to the classroom. What you have is teachers that are either unaware of these tools, that have heard about it but never used it, or that they believe it's going to stop. I've talked to a teacher that said she was terrified her students would stop learning because of giving away all that thinking to the AI. You've got teachers that think it's the most important thing that students could possibly learn because the future of work is going to be that. And then you have a whole bunch of people that'll get to it eventually. And so you have these two disparate groups that are experiencing these in ways that are quite different, like most of what happens with kids and teachers in general, that it creates this real complexity of trying to figure out how best to support those interactions.
Welcome to Humans of AI, where we tell the real stories of those who are building an AI or are making use of it in their daily lives. Today's guest is Amanda Bickerstaff, the co-founder and CEO of AI for Education, an organization aiming to help teachers and schools unlock their full potential through AI by providing workshops, trainings, tools, and resources to educators and policymakers. If you want to catch the latest episodes of the Humans of AI podcast, make sure to subscribe. And check out my free AI newsletter, Chaos Theory. And find me on social at Alex Chowmander. Now, without further ado, here's my talk with Amanda. All right, hello everybody. I'm Alex. I'm joined here with Amanda, the founder of AI for Education, an organization looking to equip teachers, educators, and really just the broader public around AI, education, and how these two things will evolve over time as AI gets more prevalent, gets better, and this new wave is happening. Welcome, Amanda, to the Humans of AI podcast. And I think first off is we'd love to hear just more about you, just your own background story, your origin story, if you will, of how you came to be, how you even got introduced to AI.
Great. Well, hi. Thank you for having me. My name's Amanda. And so I started my journey as a public school teacher in the Bronx, in a small school that no longer exists. So it was a very high complexity, low income school. I was 22 years old. I was a alternative route to teaching teacher, meaning I was part of the New York City Teaching Fellows. And yeah, I got in and the only living environment or biology teacher in the school. And it kind of was off on my own a bit. And it was something in which I've, until this last job where I was a CEO of an ed tech in Australia, having never been to Australia before then, it was definitely the hardest job I had until then. And it was something in which I say this a lot now. I wasn't very good at teaching when I started because it's not something that you just, I don't know, there's not a lot of natural teachers out there in the sense of being able to deal with not only like create great materials, but to be able to connect with students, to be able to understand their needs and context, as well as to work within a pretty significantly difficult structure. And it was something that I definitely wasn't prepared for at 22, but it taught me a ton about myself and the need for moving past the classroom in terms of thinking about equity and education of like the school is a place in which learning should happen. We hope it happens, but there's so much that goes into learning that happens outside the classroom walls. You really see, especially in low income areas. And so that was my kind of foundational, talking about origin story, that really was my origin story in terms of everything that came after that work has really guided me to today. I joke that I've had like every job in education, including like where I one time had I felt like it was a very Devil Wears Prada moment where it was a board meeting for one of the jobs, one of the foundations that I was working for when I was in grad school. And they're like, it's someone's birthday. Amanda, go find a cake. And, I had to like run around NYU trying to find a cake before there were smartphones. And so, I've had just kind of every type of job. But over the last like 8 years, I've been lucky to be building education technology companies and started to see on the other side of like what it means to actually build for an education ecosystem and make change within schools, hopefully positively. That led me to that role in Australia where we started with essentially surveys around student perceptions of teaching because teaching quality is the number one indicator of student success in the school. And students are able to, say my teacher meets these standards and is able to explain things to me in ways that I understand and have, is good at questioning and all these types of pieces. So started there, but then also did a bunch of research on the impact of COVID on teaching and learning and built a well-being product from the ground up. I got to do cognitive testing with fourth graders and talk to, I guess in my time in Australia, I had the opportunity to talk to probably over 250 school leaders around student data. that was a really fascinating experience. It also gave me some international experience, but also just again talking to practitioners, which I was a practitioner, and now being able to have the opportunity to talk from the other point of view of what does it mean to make something that matters and again, both positively impacts change within a school system. Unfortunately, that I know that, and over that 18-year trajectory, I didn't really slow down at all, and I have a weird life where I volunteer for vacation, and I kind of did that for a really long time, and so I hit a wall pretty significantly last year and left the role in Australia, traveled the world, which is really cool. Got to kind of refresh and get to a place where it was time for my next role and. I think when we were doing this work, and especially if you're kind of in that stage of your career, like I'd become a CEO, and I think in my head, like, what do you do after that? I couldn't even believe really that I'd left a CEO position. I didn't have that understanding of the next step. That I went through kind of the normal process of what do I do? And I've been good at building other people's companies, so I thought about that for a little bit, and then I was like, well, maybe I'll start my own company that with generative AI, and started looking into the application of generative AI and well-being. But the first time I used ChatGPT, I started a company. I started AI for Education, and just to help get some practical, knowledge out there about what AI was. Because the first time I used ChatGPT, and if you've heard me talk before, I hate rubrics. I mean, as not only a teacher but a former instructional designer and someone that built 600 rubrics in 20 months, I am still a broken human being from that. By the way, like the formatting and it's so important, but it's also so difficult to do this, especially when you want to do this consistently and well for your students. And when I went to ChatGPT for the first time and I entered write me a rubric, that was my first ever prompt, and it automatically did it in a beautiful table. AI for Education was born. And it was just like, okay, this is a transformational technology. We've been talking about the promise of ed tech. We've never been able to realize this is potentially the engine for that. But oh my goodness, this is not like better Google. This is something so much more for advanced that was going to require so much knowledge around capabilities, limitations, the applications that we need to have some support. So I built my first website in a weekend back in April. And that's led me to here today and talking to you, where I get to have these conversations and hopefully share best practices and resources and training around how to adopt these tools in schools.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. I Central to your story was this element I picked up on where I think trying to drive more equitable outcomes or equitable learning experiences for students, right? Whether that they be in more unfortunate type of situations that just prevent them from getting access, getting the type of care, attention, even just the resources, right, to learn at their pace that's more customized to them, maybe. And if anything, I think this new AI wave, well, one, right, we've heard broadly speaking, like, oh, this is like a democratization of technology of AI and ChatGPT for sure, like put this tech in front of the masses, right? It's such that my parents, my grandparents are saying like, oh yeah, I played around with this type of thing, or I've at least heard about it. So I think when you're at that moment, it's like, okay, some type of inflection point is happening. One thing I'd love to hear more about is especially the role of AI in this moment and how you're seeing it even today start reshaping the classroom and how teachers are trying to make sense of, even embrace, maybe even reject what's happening in AI. Could you shed some more color for that?
Yeah, I mean, so to your point, this is the fastest consumer-facing technology of not just our lifetimes, but of the world's history. It took Facebook almost a decade to get to 100 million users. It took less than 6 months for ChatGPT to get 100 million users. And so this is something in which the time scale is 20x faster. And when Facebook's first came out, it wasn't a very good technology, which I mean, and so when ChatGPT has come out, it also is not a very good technology, which we don't often talk about in the sense that these tools are a year old essentially to the place in which they have worked, even possibly consumer facing, and they have been launched widely. And this is something that has not also happened. Usually what we do is we wait a bit to beta test, to get feedback, to grow in a more, thoughtful ways. And instead, what we've done is we put this transformative technology into the hands of everybody. And so I'm not just talking about the people, the consumers, but like the amount of ed tech that is being built on generative AI is insane. I mean, it's hundreds of tools for lesson planning. It's hundreds of tools for grading and other use cases like bots for tutoring. There's probably over 100 that are just like individual education technologists that are building them themselves. And so I think that this is a really interesting time because the balance here is that this is not only brand new, but it also is very, very early. And so you don't usually buy something that only works 80% of the time. You also don't usually buy something that could be harmful to you in a biased or ungrounded stereotype type of way. But we are right now. I bought ChatGPT for to be able to do this work, and I use ChatGPT for Vision. And it essentially kind of, talked about what I looked like and like who I was and like how professional I was and said that someone else would be a CEO, not me. And like I'm paying for that tool to tell me these things. And I say that because when you think about the classroom is a really unique place where there are a lot of important interactions that happen there, but it also is only one part of teaching. And so you've got students, and if you're a high school teacher, you've got five classrooms a day. Students are moving around. They've got work at home. They've got internships. They've got what's happening outside of the classroom. And you talked about equity. You've got some parents that are very front-footed on technology, some are not. And so what's happening is students are coming into the classroom with all kinds of different knowledge and conceptions of what AI is. And so 84% of people have already used AI in some way before they even knew it. So it's in your phones, it's in the apps that you use, it's in education technology. So you already have that, but it wasn't in an explicit way. And so now that you have ChatGPT or Snapchat AI, or it's the Meta, Facebook, and Instagram fake Kylie Jenner or Mr. Beast, like those things are happening in those students' lives. And the character AI is another example where it's 18 million avatars you can choose from. It's primarily targeted at Gen Z. It's already in the top 200 websites visited in the world, and people spend more than around 2 hours a day on it. And so you already have these tools where kids are using this in these ways that go beyond it's cheating. They're going beyond use for my homework. So that's what's happening in students' lives. And that's happening pretty unfettered, meaning like it's happening without a real knowledge of exactly what's going on. And then when they get to the classroom, what you have is teachers that are either unaware of these tools, that have heard about it but never used it, or that they believe it's going to stop. I've talked to a teacher that said she was terrified her students would stop learning because of giving away all that thinking to the AI. You've got teachers that think it's the most important thing that students could possibly learn because the future of work is going to be that. And then you have a whole bunch of people that'll get to it eventually. And so you have these two disparate groups that are experiencing these in ways that are quite different, like most of what happens with kids and teachers in general, that it creates this real complexity of trying to figure out how best to support those interactions. And so I think that what you see is a lot of early adopters still, even though it's a year next month that this tool has been released widely, but you still see a really chunky, like early adopters, some teachers really infusing this into their classrooms that are rethinking their pedagogy, that are teaching around AI literacy. But then you have a vast majority of unstructured, like of no structure or no support around these tools, and students are left to their own devices. And then you see them using them in very chunky ways. So I think that all goes to this place in which we're in this really kind of wild, wild west moment in time. You talked about an inflection point. I don't ever remember in my life of being a part of an inflection point. And I've talked to some people that can remember certain times where someone talked to me recently about cable TV moving from like where we went from these big, ABC was the only, these big five or whatever, and moving to cable TV that actually felt like an inflection point that things were going to change a lot. But I haven't experienced that. But right now it's so fascinating because it's happening in our schools. And it is happening at such an uneven rate and in such a diverse manner and with very little support from policy, from federal government, from even philanthropy or other kind of frameworks, that it's still, again, here is this tool that's transformative, and either use it or don't, but like it can't be ignored, and you just have to figure it out on your own.
Would you say that it's been a universally accessible type of tool technology for most people or for students? Because one example that comes to mind is as you're seeing this rise of AI generated content, essays, written work. Well, in the education setting, right, teachers will still want to assess the student's ability to understand topics, from thoughts, long-winded writing. And they're relying on some tools to even detect whether AI was used or AI was part of it. But the results of that early on is that these tools aren't actually that reliable, that they actually perpetuate several biases, especially if you're a non-native English person, speaker, and you're writing something, even if you are genuinely writing from your own voice, your work could be flagged as AI generated. So like, has it lived up to the messaging around like, hey, this is now truly democratized, this is universally available, accessible, and useful for everybody?
So I'll take the first part of the question before I get to AI detection because I have opinions. We talked about hot takes before we started. I definitely have some on those. So universally, it isn't. So for example, Claude is considered right now at least the second most kind of the second best model out there that people can use, especially around written communication. It wasn't available outside of some like 5 countries. I don't know the exact number until like 2 weeks ago, where now it's available more widely. So there's just a geographic component of this. The EU has very strict rules around privacy and around these regulations so that ChatGPT and other tools are not really fit for purpose or possible within those schools. So we have like some geographic issues around this. You then have some access issues, and especially when something like ChatGPT 4 Vision and DALL-E 3 that just released is behind a paywall. Those tools like are really interesting and transformative that most people can't afford. You then look at like who has access to this as students and as teachers. And what you're going to notice is like everything is that like cultural capital and like the ways in which we disseminate knowledge between ourselves, that some people that really adopt this, their kids will use it, or the kids will get their parents to use it, or the other way around. But there isn't any kind of, we're not at, we're not at like the capacity where this is a tool that's used consistently and across generations. And I think it's actually a good thing. And the reason I'm going to go to the second part is these tools are the worst they will ever be, and they continue to be the worst they ever be every day. And what that means is that, when we think about this, like these tools are not very transparent, they are not reliable, and they are not fit for purpose for schools. I worked at a legal institute on yesterday or Monday on Rhode Island with a legal, a lawyer, and we were trying to write a policy, and I let him write it first. And he's like talking about like mitigating bias and student privacy and be able to redact student information. And I was like, that isn't possible right now. Like these things are not possible because the foundational models, when I say foundational model, I mean what OpenAI is creating or Meta with Llama 2, or you've got Palm, which is going to be for Google that powers Palm 2 powers Bard. OpenAI and ChatGPT, these systems are really, really not transparent. And so recently there was a Stanford, they're doing some great work. They released a foundational model transparency index last week. And it gave these 10 foundational models that every generative AI tool is built on top of pretty much, and said, how does this work in terms of how you created it, the upstream? How does it work in terms of the model itself, and like how you trained it and how it works? And then how does it impact? Like who's using it, how they're using it, who's building on it? And out of 100, can you guess the highest rate? Like what was the highest number out of 100?
Think it was 50 something actually.
54% it was Llama 2 Meta's open source model. And there were 18 indicators, a lot around training data, which causes bias in the systems, around impact usage, downstream effects. 18 of those, not one could do. Not one could have had a response to it or did it. And so this technology is so, so brand new, right? It is so in this unreliable state that we have to be incredibly cautious about what we do, because there are no X-ray glasses to say, hey, Alex, that's AI work. And when people tell you that, they are telling you it's BS. Sorry, there's like no other way to say it. Not only is it BS, there's no true digital signature. And I've talked to some people about that. There's no true digital signature. There's no watermark. There's no ability to like go and say that like anything is truly AI written. There are signals that say this is something that a kid probably didn't do that you would see in normal senses. But what we see is that not only are AI detection tools the same way that the tools are unreliable and they have their own biases. So, for example, that you said, they more likely penalize non-native English speakers over and over and over again. People that like purple prose or like really try really hard to have the perfect construction, that looks like AI. And that there's anywhere, then the accepted rate from these companies is like 1%. They're okay with it being of you accusing a kid of cheating 1% of the time. That's okay to them, which is, in my mind, not okay. And it actually is like completely damaging. And then the other end, between 15 and 20% false negatives, which means that kids that are good at doing this and are creative and are using multiple tools and rewording are scot-free. They get through every time. So it doesn't just not mean that they're not like having you false accused, but the kids that are going to be good at doing this are going to get through every, like most times. I won't say every time. And so I think that this is really important. So we have one sense that these foundational models themselves, again, are the worst they will ever be right now. They are not fit for purpose for schools. They're actually not designed for schools. They're not designed for education. Even though the dip in July for OpenAI, everyone's like, oh, the hype cycle, whatever. What they found out is most likely because kids were using it to study or homework. And then it went back up, that they know this is a common use case, but it is not an area of focus. They're not trying to design directly better tools, and these are not fit for purpose. And anything that's being built alongside it around AI detection to try to help teachers catch this inappropriate use are in themselves ineffectual. And so this idea right now of like where we are and what we have to think about is like, how do we find the balance between we can't ignore these tools because they are part of our lives and they will continue to be part of our lives, and the opportunities and upsides, which you talked about, democratization of building and being a computer scientist for the first time, are enormous. And then the other end, though, that the potential harms of these tools, the lack of reliability, the amount of things that are clearly biased, and not just global north biased, but sometimes I feel like they're American biased, and that they are going to be potentially harmful in other ways that we can't understand yet, is that there has to be something in the middle. Like, where do we find the space in the middle where we're teaching about AI literacy and critical use of these tools so that people can make good decisions about where the value can be had and where the harm can be mitigated? And if we don't do that, we're stuck.
Yeah. One thing I certainly believe that you probably have the most freshest insight in is around how teachers are responding, how new pedagogy is being formed to right either incorporate AI into the teaching curriculum, be aware that AI is likely going to be used by students left and right, and but still want to like achieve good learning outcomes. So I'd be curious to hear, like, from as you're talking with educators, teachers, and everyone, like what are some of the emerging ways that teachers are trying to, yeah, make sure that the classroom is still a good place to learn?
I mean, it's so interesting because it is like such a fascinating time. And, teachers were coming off of COVID fatigue. We're coming off from the largest, we're a part of the largest teacher shortages that we've experienced. Schools have not been made a better place in my lifetime. We keep making it a harder place and a more difficult place, but for students and teachers. And I think we sometimes forget teachers in that moment where we absolutely should be focusing on students, but it is not a one-way place. Like a teacher and a kid work together, and the best classrooms are where there is a tight, relationship and interaction, and where teacher well-being is so is student well-being usually. Like these things like come together. And so right now what's really interesting is that we have teachers and leaders that are taking these opportunities to rethink pedagogy, and to start thinking about it. But I'll start with the kind of low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit is teachers spend on average, let's say, between 6 and 10 hours a week of doing stuff that has nothing to do with teaching directly. Meaning that the moment in the classroom, which is what you're paid for, and you're paid for there's prep time that's built into your day. And there's also time for like lunch sometimes. Like, I mean, I ate lunch sometimes as a teacher, not every day, but I manage it sometimes, and professional development. But what happens is there's a lot of like additional labor around answering emails, communications, paperwork. attendance, these like supporting students' special needs, which is very important, but takes a lot of time, and grading and marking. And so, there are all of these really, really large amounts of work. Like I always say that the teacher's work week doesn't start on Monday, it starts on Sunday. Like you have like usually like your Sunday afternoon is grading papers or planning for the week or whatever. Like you're not even it's really not a 9 to 3 job 5 days a week, 9 months out of the year. And so the reason I say that is the low hanging fruit seems to be just how do we find productivity gains and how do we collapse the amount of time out of classroom? So the rubric example, it could have taken me 40 minutes to write that rubric, especially struggling with the formatting, et cetera. If I can do that in a minute and a half with ChatGPT and then in 5 contextualize it for my classroom, then I have saved time. Other places, where can I save time? I can save time on that email that I really don't want to answer because I don't want to be a little bit, testy about it. Like, can I get a little bit of help in creating something more, more professional and not as maybe angry as I feel sometimes as a teacher? Or there are these opportunities to provide first draft feedback on something or to create really cool lesson plans or activity guides. Like we have a prompt library of 75 prompts that teachers can use in any chatbot. And a lot of them, the ones I love are like lesson hooks or exit tickets or these kind of small pieces that really can drive engagement that now I can differentiate because I can have 5 different lesson hooks when I could only think of one and I can pick the best one or exit ticket. One of my favorite anecdotes is that it was so good to have, a teacher use one of our tools in Queens and she did an exit ticket. And so she got like 3 back. And her reaction was not, I'm going to pick the best one, but oh my gosh, I'm going to give all 3 to my students and I'm going to let them choose. So she's getting that extra step and allowing that to be part. And those are just like low hanging fruit. So there's a lot of tools out there that are doing that work, whether you use the chatbots directly, like with our prompt library or on your own, or you're using these kind of ChatGPT wrappers, which we call it, in the sense of like there's opportunity to do that work. So there's those pieces. And then the next step is like, how are we framing this in classrooms? And so how are we shifting traditional assessments to AI assisted or AI resistant? How are we leaning into the actual meaning of the 5 paragraph essay? Hate to tell every English teacher in the world, I am so sorry, but like we're gonna like a 5 paragraph essay is a construct. There's no reason it has to be 5 paragraphs. There's no reason it has to be a start and end and 3 in the middle. Have you ever been asked to do a 5 paragraph essay out of high school, Alex? That
If
is a
anything,
no. That
I've
is
been asked to write shorter, just get to the
exactly,
point.
exactly. Just write your thesis statement in 3 bullet points, like, and then be able to talk about it. Like that's more of the real world. So how do we take that? And teachers are starting to think about how do I take that thing that ChatGPT can do better than I can as a teacher potentially, and take that and unpick the learning objectives, the goals, the intentions, and then build it back up in a way that students can use either ChatGPT in responsible ways to help drive their thinking and not just a cognitive offload, but also in ways in which I can't be done by a bot. So I think that more and more is happening. And you see that in types of assessments, you see that in teachers integrating, these tools responsibly in the classroom by modeling them or letting students use them to like do debate topics or to model conversations or to refine an idea to create mnemonics that work for them, all kinds of things that are really cool for them to do. And that is where I think it gets really exciting. But there's a huge but here. That is not 50% of teachers. That is not 80% of teachers. That's not even 30% of teachers right now. I think it's much lower than that, unfortunately, because it hasn't been this real push towards AI literacy for teachers and practical solutions for how to do this to save time and then to actually make the classroom more interesting, authentic, whatever you want to call it. And so there is a missing piece that needs to come not just from teachers, but actually through support from the bodies that can say, I'm going to give you an hour a week just to rethink how you're thinking about this or to practice or to try. I'm going to showcase, we're going to build our own prompt library of our best prompts. We're going to showcase the best student use, the best teacher use. I'm going to give a challenge every 6 weeks for us to come up with the best solution using AI for something. Like there's not enough of that yet to really get to the place where teachers are given the support because they need the support. We should not put this all on their shoulders to actually create a space in which this is valued, which is supported, in which there are actually tools in place to help them build that literacy so that they can make that classroom better.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's so many good points, and I'd love to actually really dive more into this. But in the interest of time, one thing I'd love to allow you to do is you're working on this organization, AI for Education, and I think the ambition and the vision is just so all-encompassing and many different things to tackle. But in short, if you were to give the 2-minute version of like what is it you're trying to do, what you're seeking to hope to accomplish, and even just maybe how people can get involved, what sort of help you could receive.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, for us, we're focused on three things. So AI literacy for across the school community, AI ethics and policy. So how are we using this responsibly? And the third is AI pedagogy. So like that is and I think if you do all those three things in concert, they all support each other. So it's a cycle. Like these things, like if you're doing AI ethics right, you're building literacy, right? And then you're creating some spaces in which pedagogy can improve. The same way if you're doing pedagogy right, it starts to filter into the literacy pieces, et cetera. So that's our real focus. And the way that we're thinking about it is through a grassroots approach. So bottom up. So like supporting those early adopters and hopefully less like more and more just people and teachers and leaders through a bunch of free resources. We talked about a prompt library that's on our website, just aiforeducation.io. And then we've got webinar series. This is our first week, Alex, without a webinar in 20 weeks. So my mom just sent me a message. She's been to all of them and she's like, what time is it tonight? And I can say, we don't have one, but we have 20 of those. And we're about to launch our next slate, fully free, great professional development. We have a super robust community that's built around it as well. We have a free course. We have free resources. We just launched two in the last 3-4 days. One is around kind of the top 5 mistakes educators make with AI and how to mitigate them. And then one around the every framework. So how can you use AI responsibly every time, which is an acrostic that talks about really about everything being like responsible, but it's also you. This is you using this tool, not the other way around. And so we have things like that. And then for the top up, we actually support everything from schools, districts, leadership associations. We're on the steering committee for the new EdSafe AI Alliance that's been relaunched. And so that's really about driving AI adoption. And so we work directly with these organizations to help them do that through workshops and PD. We're launching a train the trainer model because impact is the most important thing we could do. And unfortunately, I am not scalable, nor am I quantum. So I cannot be in 2 places or 3 sometimes because I'm really bad at my calendar at the same time. So how can we actually create a space in which we're doing something around those 3 pillars that you can bring back to your context because it's always going to be better. Like I could be your like cut through your tip of the spear in whatever way possible, or someone from AI for Education as we grow. But then the only way that we're going to see real change management adoption of this is if you actually have that in your school with that capacity built and that, starting to build towards that expertise. So that's what we do. I'm always happy to chat. I'm very on LinkedIn, which I think is how I met you. We've put a bunch of resources up there pretty much every day. But we just really want to support the adoption of these tools responsibly and to make sure that we're keeping teachers, students, and leaders and the education ecosystem in the middle of this conversation because we have been ignored too much. They will let us be the major use case for ChatGPT and build us a toolkit with like that has 4 prompts only and 4 use cases and a couple FAQ, knowing that we are driving their growth. Like it needs to be more. And the only way we do that is if we come in together, we raise our voices and we say this is what we need, or we're not going to adopt it because it's not safe.
Amazing. That's the best way to cap off this podcast. Amanda, thank you so much for coming and just sharing your story, sharing about what you're doing, and honestly doing great work for equipping our teachers, the future students to really just embrace and be on top of the AI wave that's happening. So thank you again. And would certainly actually love to keep in touch to see what happens in the future for you even.
Thank you so much and I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody out there listening. And your experimentation, your commitment, your knowledge, like it's all about your use as well. This can be democratizing. So And I have one challenge to everybody is like, go try, think through how you can use this and apply this to your own practice in responsible ways, and then share it. The only reason AI for education exists is because I decided crazily that I had something to say, and then I said it, and people have found value in it. But there's so much room for people that have really good ideas about this to share this right now, because there's no reason that we can't all have a voice in this moment.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you, Amanda, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Hey, thanks for listening to Humans of AI. If you're building something with AI or have perspectives you want to share, drop me a note at alex@humansofai.xyz. And be sure to subscribe to my newsletter, Chaos Theory. Until next time, this is Alex, Resident Chaos Coordinator.